I'm pleased to welcome the last speaker, Jonathan Minchin. Jonathan is a multidisciplinary architectural designer and maker. I would add a beekeeper as well. He's working between the built environment, digital fabrication, with a particular focus on rural context. He was the person that supported IAAC and founded the Green Fab Lab at the Valdaura campus in 2013, and he's currently the project manager of one of the European projects run by IAAC and the Fab Lab Barcelona called Climate Resilient Agriculture Robotics for Microfarms. In the field of international cooperation, sustainable emergency architecture, Jonathan has worked on housing and development projects alongside UN Habitat in Barcelona, Habitat for Humanity in Costa Rica, UNESCO in Cuba, and with Basic Initiative in Tunisia. He holds a particular interest in appropriate technology and local manufacturing. And he has studied, but also he has taught at Bioacademy, Fab Academy, and he has also set up the Zero series workshops in biology, agroecology, and forestry. He founded the Open Lab platform and also the open source beehives, a fantastic project for sustainable beekeeping. So help me welcome Jonathan. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. How are you all? I think I'm still a designer. I'm not sure, but definitely I am a beekeeper. I've worked in sustainable and emergency architecture, but I've always found that it's the practice rather than the paper that makes the point. And it's the practice that makes us happy, and that is the action of regeneration. And so, in some ways, what I would like to show to you today, through some of these projects and time that I've spent in Vaidauda and at IAAC and other places, are actions, and they are actions of love. And we are doing, we are learning by living, we are learning by doing. There we go, bioregions. This is, okay, so what I'm currently doing is living between sort of three lives. I've spent the last 10 years working, the last 10 years more or less working and living in Vaidauda labs, but now I'm living in the south of Tarragona, in the south of Catalonia, on a 10-hectare agroforestry research farm. And so I've just moved down there and spend most of my time building a house on the land. You're all invited. It's olive harvest season. My fiancée is in Taiwan, and I haven't seen her in 2 years because of the pandemic, but together we work with the Fab Lab Taipei in these urban gardens, which are situated in an old baseball stadium there. But as Areti says, in 2013, somehow IAAC and I met, and they threw me up the hill with a set of keys and a dog, and asked me to start to coordinate Vaidauda Labs and the Green Fab Lab. So as we'll visit, some of us will visit Vaidauda later on in the day, I wanted to talk about some of those experiences and observations that I've had over these past 8 years or so. I'll try and do that in 10 minutes, but I'm sure we'll get there. So to start with, one of these observations that I have is the concept of the edge. And in ecology, that is an extremely important place. It's the place where two biomes meet. It is where the two ecosystems or ecologies intertwine. And here what we have is the sea meeting the land, the city meeting the rural, the past meeting the future, and lots of international people with different ideas and generations coming together into one collision point. So it's been absolutely fantastic to be in a place like this and surrounded by such interested and informed people as yourselves. It's also been absolutely exhausting. So every weekend over that period of time, we had volunteers groups, a social agriculture. This is where we would do meetings. If people wanted to do especially media interviews, I'd make them dig something first. It's very important. But what you're seeing here is Vaidauda, and it's a post-agricultural and a post-industrial landscape. And you can see these wonderful oak trees there and a pine forest in the background. But it hasn't always been like that. So in the 19th century, what we're really seeing here is this industrial landscape. And that is a complete tabula rasa, and it's a complete ideology as well. So remove the ecosystem and change the format of the land. What we have been endowed with now, however, is a completely wonderful water catchment system. So this intervention in the land slows down the movement of the water through the soil and allows us to capture it. But if we're thinking of these baselines, these perspectives of change through time, we also look at the name Vaidauda, which means Vai del Laurel, Valley of the Laurels. Now, there's only a few laurels there now. You would have to go back thousands of years to find actually a laurel forest. So what is the ecological baseline? Let me see if I can tap to the next slide. And then there's these guys. So the Cistercian monks that operated the land in the 16th century had a very interesting idea of self-sufficiency. They wanted manual labor architecture, but they wanted to know where life came from in their pursuit and search of their God. And to do that, they began to look at the soil, which I think is quite a smart thing to do, because all life grows out of it, it seems. So they were very, very productive. These were hard-working, very austere, dirty-handed monks. And more than that, they created a network. They talked, they shared their information, and they did that on a global scale. So you can see here of their abbeys, they were working in an interconnected sense of sharing that idea of local knowledge. And indeed, at that time, they created an agricultural revolution. And so, talking of revolutions, there's one every week, it seems. But this is the parity between that Cistercian network of monasteries and the network of Fab Labs, even in terms of where their location are, is quite important to understand. So if each one of those Fab Labs pertains to be able to share information globally and then make locally, having the machines and the tools to be able to make almost anything in one place, then, well, that's also got the legacy of hundreds of years behind it as well. So I quite like to think of some of these Fab operators as monks on the land working away. But when we actually look at the land itself, this is self-repair, this is regeneration, this is wilding, this is what the wild does. It self-assembles in its own way. So an abundance of difference is very interesting for us to look at here. And that's what you can see from above of these different types of oaks and pines upon the land. But I think it's more interesting for us to not think of our own interest, but to try and think from the perspective of those plants. And indeed, the whole thing is green. Everything is green in this regenerative idea. But from a plant's perspective, green is the only part of the visible spectrum that they don't need. It's a waste product. It's reflected, and that's why we see green. I think it's much more interesting to start to look at the resources that we would have on the land as a resource spectrum, but not from our point of view, from the vegetal perspective or from another species perspective. But to do that, we have to put away our own interests. So within that environment in Weidauder, I created 4 laboratories or 4 infrastructures: biology, agrology, forestry, and then only finally fabrication. And I say this because each one of those is actually of a separate tool set. And then through those tool sets, we were able to engage in the land. And I want to sort of put this into a point of view of this is learning by doing, it's learning by maintaining, it's learning by observing. And so when we're working in the garden, and Philip here is now running and designing these gardens, that's every single day. That's every single day. Going out there and observing and being a part of nature. We are a part of nature by being a part of nature and by doing. And so all of these types of work are engagements, and I think that is the very best way to observe change. I want to put out there an idea of these different sort of disciplines jumping together in this collision of environments, of intersections of knowledge. And the famous biologist, ant biologist, E.O. Wilson, has written about consilience, the literal jumping together of knowledge and disciplines. So am I an architect? Yes. Am I a beekeeper? Yes. Am I a forest gardener? Yes. Am I a biologist? Probably not. But that doesn't mean that biology is something separate from me. I can work with that and I can learn from these things. So a lot of the observation that we've been doing in Weidauder and that I've been working on is actually cataloguing, trying to understand who is where, who wants to live next to who, what sort of species are there, and really trying to map and understand those things. When we come to digital tools, because the Ecological Interaction Organization is looking at merging of traditional systems with modern technology. And so what does that mean to have digital tools? And I consider them, I think now, to just be another lens, to be able to see things in a way that our human spectra does not allow us to see. So whether it's using a LiDAR scanning system or it's using a point cloud with Metashape, for example, or sensing data, this is allowing us to track things in a way that we cannot do on that everyday experiential basis. But data is not information, and information is not wisdom, and wisdom is not practice. So in a very clear way, I think it's very important to actually do and to engage with the rhythms of the environment in which we inhabit, and not only observe. But we need to observe to be able to situate ourselves. So I'll be very fast here with these next ones. So as a result of that, we've created some open tools for farming communities. And what you can see here is a companion species, polyculture cropping, but you can also see the position of that woman's back as she's working. So this is highly labor intensive. And so this is working with nature and not against it in that sense. It's a choice to do organic agriculture. It may be easier, I'm not sure. It's a lot of work, but it is complex, that is for sure. And so developing systems that allow us to identify species, to be able to help to map species, using synthetic data sets or machine learning, computer vision, active vision, somehow for me meets the complexity that we find in nature. And it's nice to look at Larry Wall, who wants to optimize the conditions to reduce expenditure as a creator of a programming language. And then Masanobu Fukuoka from Japan, who talks about do-nothing farming. Observe the wild, let the wild be, and then build on top of it. So these two come together through complexity and computation for me. We've created a ground-based rover some monitoring equipment for organic farms, a phenotyping scanner that allows us to look at the angles of organs by scanning. This is plant development biology, looking at NDVI analyses of chlorophyll content, something that we can guess at, but we can't measure, landscape topographies, and showing that information to farmers in the form of a dashboard that allows us to plot and use computational agriculture to help us with our plant layouts. So within Europe, there's more than 50% of farms are micro farms, or organic farms, but they cannot scale. And that is a real problem for feeding ourselves in the future, is scaling up organic agriculture, because it's so manual and the tools are not there. So the open source beehives is another project with a long legacy. And we've spent a long time, or I've spent a long time, designing hives with bees in mind. So these are biodynamic beehives that essentially try to promote the health of the bees. And in a very similar way, it takes a lot of observation. So the bees are actually very communicative about change. And they are ones which we can only begin to start to read, but they are really the best sensors of all. So trying to understand what bees are doing and when and why is a very difficult task, but with machine learning and audio analysis, we can begin to pick up repeat signatures. Did you know that a queen bee constantly shouts at her brood? She does. She makes these piping and quacking sounds. And if you're brave, you can go up to the hive and listen to the queen shouting. Usually she just wants more. I'm British originally, so I know what the queen wants. Oh, just more. But then when we do analysis of the pollen, we can really see where the bees are going to be able to track how healthy an ecosystem is. So if we listen to the bees, we may be able to learn something better about ourselves, but also about the ecology around. So this is showing a particular behavior, for example, which is night, where you have some of the older bees by the entrance protecting the front. The rest of the bees come inside and make a ball around the queen to keep her warm. And so you've got that very particular audio signature. Just to finish off, I'm going to show you a nice photograph, a postcard. So if you are interested in what ecological interactions or geographic referencing might be, you can access some of these publications. But for now, I'm interested in agriculture in 3D. So not just companion species of vegetables, but 7 layers of planting as a food forest. Now this takes time to grow, but that is complex agriculture. And when we learn to be able to harvest from that at scale, we may be able to have an agroecology, an agroforestry. So I invite you to my home to be able to help me do that. This is my house and the other house, the Land Rover, that I lived in for a while. And you're more than welcome to come and visit me in Benifayet, in Terres de Ebre, to be a constant gardener in an environment of perpetual change. Please come and help. Thank you.